Is it go? Is it live? Just put AUKUS, Sqawkus. It's fine. All caps. Now we good? Now we good? Are you sure?
Yes.
Are we good?
Go
Are we
live.
good? Are we good?
Yes.
Are we live? Are we live? Are we live or is this Memorex? Now, before I make the same mistake I just made 2 seconds ago, or I started 30 minutes ago when I went on Facebooks, can anyone, is anyone here? And 2, can anyone see me? 3, can anyone hear me? Is this working? You think it's working, right? But can I get a shout out in a chat room to confirm before I spew on for 30 minutes before I realize that nothing is working? What's that? Oh, well, yeah, but I'm not ready for, oh, whoa. Everything just refocused. Maybe I'm moving too much. Okay, I see Fierce Pineapple in the Hizzle, the real cute 21 and Cube King up in this Hizzle. Welcome, friends. So what we're doing here for those of you in world regions at Virginia Tech, and people just perhaps surfing around here on Twitch going, who the hell is this crazy guy? My name is Professor John Boyer. I teach a class called World Regions at Virginia Tech. Go Hokies. Boy, what a heartbreaker that was on Saturday. And this class I teach about the whole world, and I sometimes pick on current events that students have brought up to me to explain them a little bit more in depth. Because when we see news out there, it's little snippets, it's a little too succinct. They're sound bites, and people are like, wow, this thing is happening. But they never really explain why it's important. That's what I'm here for. And I used to do a lot more of it, and I'm going to try to do a lot more of it here in the future. All Odie is now following. Thank you. That little heart thing pops up. It's adorable on the screen. That means someone's following me. So what caught my eye, and for those of you that are currently in World Regions here in fall 2021, I did talk about the Afghan situation all last week, and I said I was going to follow up with talking about geopolitical repercussions of the power vacuum created by the United States leaving. However, that something else happened last week that really caught my eye. So the power vacuum thing in Afghanistan, we can bring up in another day. Hopefully that doesn't disappoint too many of you. But what happened in the interim was that the United States last Wednesday went on international air and said, we are going to start selling submarines to Australia. And all hell broke loose 2 seconds after that. Now, if you don't know any better, you might think, who cares? I mean, maybe you think, who cares anyway? But why is this a big deal? The news didn't really tell you too much. It's the news always wants to grab onto any fury or rage or angst or anything that causes people to be upset, because that's what sells newspapers and gets clicks. But they don't really explain the backstory. So when I read this story initially, I was like, that's really interesting, because I'm putting together dots in my mind of 20 to 30 years experience watching the news and following the world. And I'm seeing a much bigger pattern here, which really is exciting. If you're China, it's not that exciting. And, I'm not even saying it's exciting because I live in America and rah America. I'm saying this is kind of a groundbreaking thing that's occurring, but you wouldn't know it unless someone like me tells you about it. So that's what I'm going to do now. And I call this the AUKUS Sqawkus. This actually is going to turn into much more than a submarine deal. I see a new TEAM ANGLO arising on the world stage. Okay, that's big words, Boyer. What do you mean a tectonic shift in international groupings that's going to affect world politics and defense posturing and a whole host of other things for the rest of our lives? Yes, it is that important. So let's get to it and do it, shall we? As always, Feel free to ask questions along the way. And IDCI in the Hizzle saying, USA, 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 and Australia. Okay, here we go. So, first and foremost, what was it that happened? And by the way, this is a story that came out on The Economist today, well-respected international publication, The Economist, that says the AUKUS pact is a sign of a new global order. And that's what's really important about this. It's submarine deals like, yeah. This is a big deal, and even The Economist is in agreement with me, or I'm in agreement with The Economist, whichever one you trust more. Okay, so what happened? It was last Wednesday, September 15th, 2021, that Joe Biden did a international Twitch Zoom stream with U.S. President Joe Biden with United Kingdom Prime Minister Boris, I can't find a comb, Johnson, and the Australian Prime Minister, Scott Morrison. And you see them all there on the little screens looking at each other. How adorable. And they announced, hey, everybody, the United States is going to sell or give nuclear-powered submarines to Australia. Again, on the face of it, whoop-de-doo. It's actually a really big deal. Australia does not have any submarines at all, I don't think, and it certainly doesn't have nuclear-powered ones. So let's get to why this big announcement last Wednesday was such a big announcement. Submarine program unveiled in a joint address for the three countries, and they're calling it AUKUS. It's basically a defense partnership / alliance / agreement. It's so early days, we're not exactly sure what to call it yet. What the hell is AUKUS? What's the Sqawkus about AUKUS? AUKUS is A for Australia, UK for the United Kingdom, and US for the United States of America. So a kind of awkward acronym. Not acronym. What do you call it when it's letters put together? I always forget that one. Somebody in the chat room, what is it when you use letters and put together a word and it's AUKUS? So awkward to say and causing quite a squawk on the international stage. Australia will consult with the United States and the United Kingdom for the next 18 months. That's just a year and a half. And the submarine fleet will be built in the South Australia city of Adelaide, a wonderful place. If you've never been there, by all means, go and party. The United States hasn't shared nuclear submarine technology with any country except the United Kingdom ever. And it hasn't even done that for more than half a century. So after World War II, when the United States was developing nuclear submarine technologies and got to the point of doing it, it only shared this with the United Kingdom and hasn't done it since. And that's why there's a special, we call it the special relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom. Only the bestest of bestest friends share this top grade technology, and the United States has shared it with no one else until last Wednesday. So Australia will join a very small club of countries that the United States has shared top-level nuclear secrets with. To be sure, I want you to understand, what we're talking about is nuclear-powered submarines, not nuclear-armed submarines. I think you understand what a nuclear weapon is. It's a weapon that goes really big boom, causes all sorts of death and destruction, and atomic wasteland. Okay? And the United States and several other countries have that technology. But we're talking about a nuclear-powered submarine. What's such a big deal about a nuclear-powered submarine? Well, nuclear power, basically a nuclear-powered submarine is a nuclear power plant in miniature that's on a submarine, which means the submarine makes its own energy, which means it can stay down for extended periods of time. It need never come up for energy. Conventional submarines run on electricity that's created by burning of diesel. So you're burning a fossil fuel, which means you have to come up out of the water to refuel. With a nuclear-powered submarine, you can stay down forever and because you're making your own power. Now, you have to come up every now and again for oxygen and food. But the point is that a nuclear-powered submarine has radically increased distances it can travel covertly. So this is a really big deal for defensive and, quite frankly, offensive purposes. Nuclear-powered submarines are a huge revolution in submarine warfare because submarines are silent And submarines, you can move around the world's oceans, and you can park a submarine without anybody know it right off the coast of your enemy. The United States could have nuclear-powered submarines off the coast of China right now, and Russia, or South Africa they want. And China could have nuclear-powered submarines off the coast of Cuba and Great Britain. So they're really a big deal. And Australia, which I don't believe has any submarines, is now getting the top flight of submarines. It's that big of a deal. Okay, you with me? Now, why? I'm sorry, there's already a question. Let's see. ICD says, aren't subs using enriched uranium? That is one step closer to nuclear weapons, at least in theory. No. I mean, to enrich for a weapon is a different beast, and I am not a physicist or a nuclear physicist, and I don't even play one on TV. But I think I know enough to know that when you have your little power plant, yes, there would be remnants of some of that stuff that you could use to enrich, but it's of such small quantities. We're only talking about a submarine, okay? So it's such small quantities, and it's so dangerous to transport, it would not be utilized for that. You have specific enrichment production areas to get to the point, the quality and the amounts that you need for bombs. But someone can check my facts on that. But no, I wouldn't put 2 and 2 together on that. The nuclear subs, not really related to nuclear weapons, except, of course, that they use kind of the same fuels. But I wouldn't say that one goes into the other. Okay? Next question was, this may be a dumb question, but why does Australia need them? Au contraire, J. Dietna. That is exactly the right question to ask. Why does Australia need nuclear-powered submarines when it has none? Here's why, and this is why it's such a huge deal on the world stage that this AUKUS group is forming up. The 3 leaders framed AUKUS as a broad bid for security in the Indo-Pacific region, but let's be brutally honest, it's all about containment of a growing and a growingly aggressive China. Mic drop. Boom. That's what it's all about. Unless you've been hiding under a rock for the better part of this entire 21st century, you should know by now that the main conflict, possible conflict, and already friction between the 2 real world powers in today's world is now between the U.S. and China. Yeah, Russia's still around. Yeah, France and the U.K. are still doing stuff. This is like the new Cold War. Last century, the 2 main powers that faced off for the better part of the century were the United States and Russia. This century, it's the United States and China. And I don't think it's too much of an exaggeration to go ahead and start talking about, yes, this is a kind of a Cold War scenario. And quite frankly, we want to keep it a Cold War scenario between the U.S. and China, because a hot war scenario means we all die. So there are many frictions between these 2 very big powers. China is coming into its own after 200 years of humiliation, self-defined period of humiliation, where it was battered and beaten and humiliated by Western powers, not specifically the United States, but many others. And now it's back on its feet, and it's a world power, period. World's biggest economy, if it's not yet, it will be. Growing the world's biggest military, at least it's trying. And it's posturing itself defensively and offensively to be a major player on planet Earth, which it is. The United States, as the biggest power and the biggest military and used to be the biggest economy, is obviously going to come in some friction and conflict with China. So that's what this AUKUS is all about, containment. In fact, it was called the policy of containment that created the Cold War. Back after World War II, big thinkers on both sides of the Atlantic formed up NATO. We'll get to that in a second. Primarily to be a deterrent and a container of an aggressive Soviet Union. Okay? So we're seeing kind of the same policies start to play out in the Pacific. Let me read that top line again. Leaders framed AUKUS as a bid for security in the Indo-Pacific region. The Indo-Pacific, the Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean, the Indo-Pacific region is going to be the face-off of the 21st century. Much the same way that NATO, I forget, what did NATO stand for? For you folks in the class, have you watched NATO yet? NATO stands for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, a defensive pact between a whole bunch of countries, the US, the UK, Canada, and a bunch of other European countries, to form a collective defense against an aggressive Soviet Union. I'm looking at this AUKUS as perhaps the start of a NATO of the Pacific. Boom! You heard it here first. Okay, back to the question of why does Australia need this? Well, because Australia, along with others, mostly the United States, the United Kingdom, most NATO countries, most Southeast Asian countries, quite frankly, and India and Japan, all are looking what's happening with a growing assertive China, and they're a little worried. And so what you have here is a China that has already claimed to own the South China Sea. You see it on that little map there in the corner, the South China Sea, which is way off the coast of China. I mean, China has coastal frontage, but the South China Sea borders like 7 or 8 other sovereign states who actually have a better international claim to it. But China says, nope, whole South China Sea, that's ours. So that's worrisome. And they've been trying to prove that's theirs by building military bases all around it. That's being contested on the world stage. And the United States routinely sails naval ships through the South China Sea to say, hey, by the way, China, no, it's not yours. So on top of that, China has something called its island chain strategy. Dig this. If you're in my class, you're going to see this on the pop quiz for this one, but also in future lectures. First island and second island chains are supremely important to understand China's motivations in the 21st century. I'll long be dead when you good people are still watching this stuff unroll. So the island chain strategy are, and you look at the map I just popped up there, first island chain, that red line, basically, and I'm generalizing here, first island chain, China is saying everything behind this red line is ours. It is our property. That ocean is ours. All the islands within that ocean are ours. It's our territory. Don't come into this territory. If anybody moves into this territory, and we're talking about the South China Sea too, if anybody, and the East China Sea, if anybody comes into this territory, we consider that Chinese property and we will consider it an attack on China. Now, they're not there yet, but they're working their initiatives to be able to project enough naval and air strength to say definitively at some point in the near future, this is ours, and we will bomb anyone who comes into this area. That's first chain strategy. Second chain strategy is a little different. You see that's kind of further out into the Pacific Ocean. And that one's more of a projection of strength line. China's saying we want to be strong enough that we're not claiming we own half the Pacific Ocean, but we're pretty much drawing a line down the middle of the Pacific Ocean and saying, U.S., you're on your side, and this side is ours. Don't mess around. We can project strength, both naval and air and submarine, into this area, so don't mess. We're not going to tell you ask permission, but we're saying we can defend this if we have to. I'm sorry, you have a question?
Yeah, you got something.
Several questions. China sanctioned Australia earlier this year, says IDCI. Oh, look at that, IDCI. The next two things I was going to get into was China's already in a trade war with the United States, and China's actually in a trade war with Australia since the beginning part of the year. You're too smart, IDCI. Let's see, what other ones I missed? So Australia can't just let their biggest trade partner being such a bully. True. Non-military but economic-related issue with China. Someone pointed me to a link. I'll look at that later. Ashimi21 says, what about the Quad? Hold on to that. We'll get to that probably in the next 5 hours, given all these great questions. And Cube King says, does the island chain strategy have to do with China building islands too? Yes, Cube King, if you have heard of China building islands, that's down in the South China Sea. China has been, for years now, and very aggressively in the last 5 years, been literally building islands and building military installations on them. Building military installations, but also arming those installations, building airstrips. And China always does this hilarious thing, which I like to point out in class and have for decades, where they take pregnant women to nondescript islands around the world or even Antarctica. Heavily pregnant women, they let the pregnant woman sit on this island they've created. Then when the pregnant woman gives birth, they're like, citizen. This citizen was born here. Obviously, it's Chinese territory. We have a citizen who was born there. I don't know that anybody buys that theory, but they're still putting it out there. So back to point. That's a really big comment there. A propaganda video saying offensive policy with nuclear weapons changed. Let me get a couple more slides. I'll try to come back to that. That's a really big comment, but thank you for making it. So the point I'm making on this slide is that you already have some frictions that have been building for decades, certainly last decade, of economic policy. You have frictions between the United States and China on political issues, on international issues, on territorial issues, and now we're having frictions with defensive/offensive military issues. So this is just the beginning of this, my friends. And China is growing very fast, but make no bones about it, they're not as powerful militarily speaking as the United States is yet. But they're working on it. And you buy these island chain strategies, and they launched their first aircraft carriers a few years back. And they are a nuclear armed nation. So they're getting there, and they're getting there quickly. And they're trying to say, hey, here's what our policies are. We're putting everybody on notice. This is what we consider ours and what we're going to defend. And that's that. These other countries, with Australia now on board, is saying, we're going to push back against that a little bit. That looks a bit aggressive. It's a little too aggressive for our taste. Particularly the South China Sea, internationally, even at the United Nations, everybody said, no, you can't own all of that. Other countries who border the South China Sea have claims on that. It's not just all China. So that fight's already been underway. Much less if you see that behind the first island chain is a little country called Taiwan, which, of course, may or may not be a country. And China may or may not invade it soon to prove that it owns it. So other issues that you'll see unfold very soon. Now, back to the deal. Okay. Someone says massive 4D chess by the government. Yes, Enigma, that's pretty much, this is the game of Risk in real time. So back to the sub deal. Some immediate results of this that I shouldn't gloss over. France was furious, and they still are furious. Last Thursday, one day after this announcement, France recalled all of its ambassadors from the United States, a move that has never happened in the history of the United States. Remember, I believe this is a historical accuracy to say that France is the United States' oldest foreign partner and ally. Period. Remember, France helped the United States in the U.S. Revolutionary War and has been an ally ever since. So that's how big a deal it is. France recalled its ambassadors for the first time in United States history. And then earlier today, France canceled a defensive talk, a group talk that was supposed to happen with the United Kingdom to show its displeasure with the United Kingdom being involved in this. By the way, they did not recall its ambassadors from the United Kingdom, and that was a diss. The French basically said, you know what, UK, you had some hand in this and we're pissed off, but we're not even going to show you enough respect to pull our ambassadors from your country because you're not worthy of our attention. The reasons they're pissed, there's two for you to know for a possible quiz if anybody's making questions. This was a $50 or $60 or $66 billion deal that the French had already set up to sell submarines to Australia. 50, 60, or $66 billion. That's a significant deal. So money being lost, but it's more about face being lost. France was not told about this. Basically, Australian Prime Minister Morrison called up French President Macron 3 hours before this deal was announced and said, oh, by the way, remember that $60 billion deal we were going to do? Yeah, we don't need that anymore. We cancel it. Thanks. Bye-bye. Boom. And then they got on international air 3 hours later and said, oh, by the way, we have this huge pact with the United States to get nuclear submarines. To defend the deal just for a second, the French were going to sell the Aussies conventionally diesel electric powered submarines. So this is, yes, it's a diss to the French, but it wasn't a diss to the French intentionally just to piss off the French. It was much more that, hey, Australia, the United States needs you to have way better submarines for our strategic long-term purposes. And so we're going to sell you something better. So just cancel that deal with the Frenchies. It was also rumored and actually heavily speculated that the French deal had already started to go south. They were 1 or 2 or 4 years behind on production. And again, it was an older model. So the French get dissed. The other reason that the French are very unhappy about this is, again, they're dissed. They weren't even told about this in advance. They couldn't save face. And the French actually have aspirations as still being a world power. No offense to the Frenchies. If you want me to say you're a world power to make you feel better, that's fine. But they've always fancied themselves as a major world player. And so this sidelines them in a deal on the other side of the planet. It also pisses them off because the French actually have some territories over in the Pacific and were already themselves strategically aligning with the Australians in order to help counter the growth of China. So everybody was kind of has the same mission here, but France just pretty much got left out on the cold. By the way, what does France own? There's like French Polynesia and a handful of other places. The French have military bases there, and the French have citizens there. So the French really did get kind of left out on the cold on this one, and they are rightfully unhappy, okay? And, of course, the also immediate impact is China denounces this as a irresponsible pact, that China is nothing but the best country on planet Earth that never will ever harm a fly, and we're totally innocent of anything, and this is just fueling the fire of possible war, and all these people are warmongers who are doing this because China is ever peaceful forever. And it's like, sure. Every country's going to say what it wants to say to make itself look good. So China's none too happy about this deal either, because now it's kind of putting it out in the open that this is a policy of containment that is aimed at them, and now other countries are signing up for it. Namely Australia, which is a test question, had not signed up for this until last week. What I mean by that is Australia has not been wanting to join an international pact of any sort that would piss off China. And they crossed the Rubicon last Wednesday when they joined this group. Cool? Okay. So, I'm going to get some questions, I guess, before I go on to global repercussions. Let's see. How many years until India becomes a threat to China in the region? Good question, IDCI. Maybe we'll get to some of that before the end of this. Didn't bring in Liberia with us either. Okay, most of these are comments. They're funny. A deal regarding naval forces. It was a long time since France won anything notable at sea. Fair enough, IDCI. French subs aren't that bad of a deal. I heard they have really good reverse speed. Wow. Well said, Cube King. Oh, the comments are here way better than anything I'm saying. Okay. But I actually that's what happened. Now I just want to get to some global repercussions and then the real deal of why that I think this is a terribly important story. What does the AUKUS deal mean to the United Kingdom? It means the United Kingdom is a player again. Quite frankly, I just made fun of France for not being a major world player anymore. And the UK could be put in that category. Remember, the UK just did that Brexit deal, which the whole world thought was kind of weird. Sorry, Brits, but pretty much half your population and the vast majority of the world was like, you guys are pulling out of the European Union? Are you idiots? So they still are recovering from, once again, retracting from an organization and going it solo, but they're a much diminished power. They're the former British Empire. They're a small group of islands now that economically are not that important. They have a big financial sector, but their time has passed. And so this being a part of this AUKUS deal, suddenly it puts a big win in Boris Johnson's column for international prestige and making the United Kingdom important again. Maybe now they can find him a hairbrush. I don't know. Maybe he can get a kickback off the nuclear deal to buy a haircut. So the UK back in the limelight, at least temporarily, looking like a world power again, with partnering up with the United States, which the U.S. and UK have always been strategic, strong partners. That's why we say they have a special relationship. The U.S. and UK have always had a special relationship. That's why the United States shared nuclear sub-technology with them 60 years ago. So that's what the UK gets out of this. What does this mean to the French, and I'm saying the EU and or NATO? This is perhaps slightly worrisome to the European Union, and perhaps slightly worrisome to NATO, although I think not much. But what this will result in for Europe, particularly France and Germany, is that once again, we have the UK, which is now out of the European Union and now staunchly in the US camp. And that's leaving a questionable future of who's going to defend Europe. NATO is still in place. I don't think NATO is going anywhere. But I think what's going to change is France, now being sidelined by this deal, will step up along with Germany and other European countries to say, you know what? After 4 years of former President Trump's rhetoric of how he was going to slash his NATO budget and how NATO should be disbanded and how the European powers should be paying for their own defense, this AUKUS deal is putting the icing, unfortunately, on that cake for them. And they're going to have to step up and do more for their own collective self-defense. And I think you will see that happen. I think the European Union now is looking at 4 years of Trump, NATO not being what it was, and now this move by the United States and the United Kingdom to shift focus to the Indo-Pacific as a real wake-up call of, well, crap. Yeah, we better start ponying up our defense budgets more and kind of taking care of our own defense more. Still have NATO, but you're going to see changes happen, and many would argue those changes are past due. That's what Donald Trump argued for 4 years, that the Europeans should have been ponying up more for NATO all these decades. I believe you're going to see that now start to happen. Okay. And by the way, I think you'll see France step up even more as a leader of Europe because it wants to be a world power and it feels like it's been dissed. You're going to see the United Kingdom distance itself even more from the European Union. It already Brexited. And now it's basically throwing in its lot with the United States for foreign policy and a strategic shared defense. So that's what it means to the Europeans, the French in particular. And this is actually going to have to be addressed at the next NATO meeting. My instinct is it's not going to change NATO much. Remember, NATO is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Well, the Atlantic still exists. And then NATO was formed to counter a growing and aggressive Soviet Union, which is now a growing and aggressive Russia. So the reason for NATO still exists. Russia. I don't think you're going to see NATO going anywhere, but you're going to see European powers start to step up a lot more than they have in times past. Now, what does this deal mean for Australia? Well, for Australia, it means the Aussies get to join the Big Boy Sub Club. And I just created that for this presentation. Somebody simply must make a t-shirt out of that. The Big Boy Sub Club. Australia's now in it. Here are all of the nuclear submarines on planet Earth. And I love to point things out. I love these charts because they tell you everything you need to understand about world military power politics in one graphic. Let's see, of all the nuclear-powered submarines on planet Earth, the U.S. has 68, which my math's not my strong suit, but it looks like that's more than all the rest of the world put together. Russia, being our former Cold War adversary, has less than half of that. China, which is the next Cold War adversary, has less than a fifth of that. So China's still building fast. But the United States is the overwhelming presence for this particular military technology on planet Earth. France has 8, the UK has 11. But now you start to look at who's going to be joining this list. By the way, India's on this list. Check out, India has 1. What language is one of the official languages of India? It's English. That's interesting, isn't it? And now Australia will join this, and Australia will leapfrog India because I think they're going to have 6? I think I heard the number 6 somewhere, but maybe I'm off on that. And maybe if they get more than 8, they'll leapfrog France itself. So it's kind of a big deal. And now, as I suggested on an earlier slide, feels like a test question again. Australia has now officially picked a side in this new 21st century Cold War between the U.S. and China. It had basically hedged its bets for the last 20 or 30 years. Australia is a huge trading partner of China. Australia sells tons of commodities, mostly raw commodities, to China. Australia exports coal, uranium, wool, lamb, beef, all to China. It's a huge, big deal. Australia, for the last 20 or 30 years, has not wanted to piss off China. They just have not wanted to do it because it's economically a hardship for them. That all just changed. And someone referenced this earlier. Part of it was that the Australians and the Chinese have been in a trade war already since 2021 began. Back in January of 2021, China got pissed off at Australia because Australia joined a growing coalition of voices to suggest that the WHO and an international coalition of researchers should be allowed into China to find the origins of the coronavirus. And a couple of other sticky international things between the Australians and the Chinese. And China got pissed off and slapped a 200% tariff on all Australian wine and super high tariffs on a bunch of other Australian goods. So I get a combination of that and starting to think long term about the security of the South China Sea and the Pacific Ocean in general. And free movement of goods and services. And, being a democracy, I guess Australia finally just said, we're going to bet the farm on the United States instead of straddling the fence anymore. And again, this is a big deal. China has not openly countered or said anything about Australia yet, but you heard it here first. China will not be buying as much stuff from Australia permanently, forever. China will punish Australia and any other countries who try to join a league that they deem is trying to contain them. And it's hard to see how this nuclear sub deal with Australia is anything but a defensive containment measure that they've sided up with the U.S. and the U.K. and Team West in general. Yes, question.
Barbecue time. Would it have been better to get nuclear carriers, or are they trying to counter Chinese carriers or so?
Barbecue time. Great screen name. I missed that. That must have been a while. Oh, I see it now. Would it have been better to get nuclear carriers, or are they trying to counter Chinese carriers with subs? No. Remember, the other great thing about subs is they are covert. They are covert and they're super long range. So the greatest benefit of subs is reconnaissance. Reconnaissance, and you don't know where they're at. And if you want to have offensive posturing, you can put a bunch of warheads on a submarine and park it, 100 miles off the coast of China. And China can park a bunch of nuclear missiles on a nuclear sub 100 miles off the coast of California. So subs are a different beast. Aircraft carriers are visual. They are a definite statement and projection of power. Make no bones about it, barbecue. You're absolutely right. Projection of power, but they are an overt projection of power. You see them, you know where they're at, and subsequently, they're easier to bomb. Excuse me. So both of them are projections of power. One is more secretive, one is more open. Quite frankly, subs are much more lethal because you don't know where they're at, and they can get quite close to you and launch nuclear weapons at you. And there's a bunch of those on planet Earth, too, that are all over the place. So much more lethal. Again, the Australian subs, this is a test question for anybody making questions for me. The Australian subs, they've already openly said, these are not carrying weapons, or they're not carrying nuclear weapons, okay? They may carry some weapons, but they're not carrying nuclear weapons. Okay, this is more about defense / covert operations / reconnaissance, going around and looking at what's going on around the Indo-Pacific Ocean region. Okay, so Australians have picked a side. That's a huge, big deal for Australia. It's going to affect them economically almost immediately. They have picked a side. Okay, now let's get to the conclusion. There's a much bigger picture about this AUKUS deal that I think it's a tectonic shift in international politics and international organizations. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say it's a tectonic shift. It's a big deal. It's a big deal like the fall of the Berlin Wall. It's a big deal like Richard Nixon visiting China in 1972. It's what we call, if you're ever on the open ocean, a sea change. Okay? A sea change. SEA. Pun intended. Sea change. Nuclear subs. You got it. Sea change is when, the ocean's moving this way, the big swells are moving this way, and there's a sea change. Something, it's slow, it's almost imperceptible, but things are now starting to move in a different direction. And the first and most biggest one is that strategically and now openly, the United States and its allies are saying the Indo-Pacific region is where we're going to be focusing for the rest of the century or beyond. We still have NATO. We still have our European allies, but that is no longer our focus. Our focus is the Pacific. That's sea change number one, okay? But we can get more real than that when we're talking about the tangibles of the AUKUS deal itself. What is the AUKUS? Again, we don't know. It's an acronym. Actually, I had it right. It is acronym. It's an acronym of the three nations in a trilateral security pact. I just literally ripped this off of Wikipedia earlier because it just got created 2 days ago. That's how new this is. When they announced the sub deal last week, they announced the AUKUS deal. Everybody's like, okay, what the hell is AUKUS? Now they're saying it's a trilateral security pact. Okay, what does that mean? Is it like NATO Article 5? If Australia gets attacked, is AUKUS saying that we will come defend you? I don't know, and no one does. The agreement covers key areas as artificial intelligence, cyber warfare, underwater capabilities, long-range strike capabilities. It's going to have a nuclear component. It already does because of this sub deal. And so there's all sorts of nuances to this that we don't know about because it's so new and it's just forming up. That's why I say it's a tectonic shift. This is brand new. And, could it all go away next week? I mean, maybe. I don't think so. This one is here to stay, which is why I'm saying it's a shift. The last sentence here says the agreement will focus on military capability. Military capability. That means you're doing stuff with your military. Separating it from the Five Eyes Intelligence Sharing Alliance, which also consists of New Zealand and Canada. Whoa. Five Eyes? What the hell is Five Eyes? Do you all know about Five Eyes? I only got two. So, seriously, anybody in the chat room right now, have you ever even heard of the Five Eyes program? Just kind of banter it in there for you. IDCI must be a professor of political science and history because IDCI knows everything. So, Five Eyes has actually been around since World War II, and hardly anyone has ever heard of it. 1946, the U.S. and UK agree unrestricted exchange of intelligence on communications of foreign nations. Unrestricted exchange of intelligence. Okay? Well, first off, who are the five? Who are the Five Eyes? The U.S. and UK, you got that. Canada, Australia, New Zealand. I'm going to pitch this out there just one more time for you to take a swing at. What's the official language of all those countries? English. In fact, all these countries used to be, with the exception of the UK, used to be colonies of the UK. So these are five countries that have a shared language, even here into the 21st century, but they have a shared common cultural heritage and a common history. And, a lot of the same common laws and democracy and capitalism. So I'm just putting food for thought into your brain of where I'm going with this in another 2 slides. Five Eyes formed up right after World War II. It's an intelligence alliance, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, UK, US. And the origins can be traced back to the informal secret meetings during World War II between British and U.S. code breakers before they even entered the war. This is even pre-NATO, okay? And when Winston Churchill said, oh, by the way, the next big threat's the Soviet Union, that's when they said, hey, you know what? we all agree the Soviet Union is going to be the next big problem. Why don't all of us allies, like the really tight allies? You notice, by the way, France is not here. Germany's not here. Oh, yeah, because Germany was a bad guy in World War II. But Belgium is not in here. Italy's not in here. But mostly France is not in here. So that's interesting, right? It's all the English-speaking countries, the tightest allies, I suppose you could say, from World War II, that said we're comfortable enough with each other to share a lot of knowledge. A lot of knowledge. And in fact, I think it's called sensor intelligence. And what you see in that bottom picture there is sensors, radar, stuff in space, picking up signals, radio signals, information, broadband, internet, everything. You know, there are locations, and Australia is a huge one, that just suck in all information that's out there on planet Earth. It's called intelligence. And these 5 countries share all that stuff. Now, each country has its own missions and stuff. They don't share every damn thing. The FBI ain't telling. The CIA covert operations is not telling Australia what's going on. So each of them have their own things. And by the way, all these countries probably spy on each other too. But when it comes to the tremendous volume of stuff, intelligence accumulated, these 5 countries share it, are sharing it, and have shared it since 1946. So they already had this kind of separate team already in place. 5 Eyes. Cool, right? Add to that something I've reported on that's brand new called the Quad. Now, the Quad has got nothing to do with 5 Eyes, and the Quad involves other countries that aren't necessarily English speakers. But the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, a.k.a. the Quad, just formed up, I don't know, I want to say 10 years ago. It's new, and it really hasn't even done that much, but it's increasingly doing more. And the Quad countries, the 4, as you might get from the Quad, are the U.S., India, Japan, and Australia. Here we go. We got Australia and the United States in another organization together, but this time with India and Japan. And the Quad have been quietly meeting, and now they're openly meeting. In fact, they're meeting next week. They're starting to have now open meetings about what? About everything. Diplomatic and military arrangement that also is talking about economics and military power, although they've not done much with the military yet. But again, where are those countries at? Well, the U.S. is the U.S., but then there's Japan, Australia, India, all countries that are around China. Isn't that interesting? It is, and it's intentional. The Quad was intentionally set up 10 or more years ago between the biggest democracies and allies to counter China, or at least to start exchanging information about economic policy and perhaps military policy and certainly political policy on the world stage of, hey, we're going to coordinate a bit more as really big countries, big economies, big populations, not Australia with population, but all these are top 20 economies, and all of them have really big populations, and all of them have decent militaries. So isn't that interesting that the U.S. and Australia are in another group that also has some English speakers, the Indians? And that leads to my last one, which has also been floated a lot in the last 5 years, called the Asian Axis of Democracy. Now, this one is really in its formative stages. But the United States, and you see former President Trump there in the middle looking as awkward as he always does, holding hands with Rodrigo Duterte of the Philippines, and I think that's the Prime Minister of, I don't even know, I think that's the Prime Minister of Japan, or maybe even Singapore. So who are the democracies in Asia? Japan, South Korea, Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, India. Lesser degrees of democracy in a few other places like, Burma used to be a democracy before it just fell back in. Indonesia's a democracy. Still a newer formative democracy. But those big partners I just said, India, Japan, South Korea, Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, well-established democracies. And location, where are they? all around the rim of China. Now we have another group who may be getting together to promote democracy and exchange of politics and economic ideas that all are around China. Do you see the theme happening here? So I'm looking at all this from the Boyer perspective and saying of Five Eyes, plus the Quad, plus the Asian Axis of Democracy, plus AUKUS equals, I'm calling it a Team Anglo arising. And this Team Anglo is not all of the countries I just named and all of those entities, but a Team Anglo that serves as the cornerstone, as the foundational stone of a new Indo-Pacific China-containing collaborative defense and security crew. Booyah! You heard it here first, my friends. That's what AUKUS is all about. That's why AUKUS is important. And when I say Team Anglo arising, who else might join this team? Now, I'm the only one that's calling it Team Anglo, based primarily on language. Anglo means English, okay? So the AUKUS crew, obviously, that's a core, used to be colonies of Great Britain, share common heritage, history, all that other crap. Canada will likely join Team Anglo and this AUKUS pact probably very soon. Singapore might also do it because even though it's Asian people, it used to be a British colony, English is a primary language. New Zealand will likely join. Why wouldn't they? They're already in Five Eyes and a couple of other entities. India is an English-speaking country. It's not the dominant language, but it's an official language. It's the lingua franca, all right? And it's a democracy. So you start to look at all of these things, and there are many English-speaking countries in Africa because Eastern Africa borders the Indian Ocean. So China, I should have actually showed a slide of this already. China has grand designs to unify or at least interconnect the whole Eurasian continent and Africa to itself. It's called the Belt and Road Initiative. China, this is all public information. China's not hiding it. China has been lending and giving billions of dollars of aid and assistance and infrastructure to help building roads and pipelines, sea lanes, port facilities. China has grand ambitions to rework the whole Eurasian African world that centers around them. By the way, I'm not faulting for them for that. That's what countries do. Okay, for the better part of 100 years, the whole world economy has been centered around the United States. And China is saying, that's the past. We're going to build a world where a lot of the world is centered around us. I do not fault them. It is what big powers do. No biggie. But what is the big deal is that the United States and now this team is going to aggressively counter that by forming up a tighter and tighter unit. I believe we're at the beginnings of a Team Anglo that will incorporate a stronger and stronger strategic and defensive and perhaps economic ties between the members of the team that will include India. And by the way, it will include Japan, even though they don't speak English. So the AUKUS is the core. That's what I'm saying. And Team Anglo is the core upon which it's going to become a bigger infrastructure that will be defensive originally, but will immediately start pulling in economic, and it might pull in offensive military, and it might pull in political. In other words, a new team that's going to say, hey, China's really changing the world, and China has a big clout in, say, the United Nations. China and its allies are politically taking over and economically taking over. And we here at Team Anglo are going to say we're going to start aggressively countering that with a new team. So you may see a future where the Team Anglo at the core has a bunch of strategic allies that are pro-democracy, capitalist, free market entities around the Pacific Indian Ocean rim to join them strategically, let's say, at the United Nations to stand up against something aggressive China does. Or that they will form a defensive pact, much like NATO. I think the AUKUS thing is going to turn into a Pacific Ocean NATO very quickly. Call it a PATO. And that would be a true game changer. Remember, if you've not, remember if you've already watched it, and learn it if you haven't seen it yet. But the NATO Article 5 is the most important part of the NATO Charter. And NATO Article 5 says an attack on any one of us is interpreted as an attack on all of us, and it will be treated as such. If the AUKUS group starts a Pacific-based NATO operation with a similar Article 5, that is a very big deal to China. China would very much like to not see that happen, because that's why the Cold War stayed cold. If the Soviet Union ever would have invaded even Belgium was a part of NATO, it would have been considered an attack on all NATO countries, and all NATO countries would have to attack the Soviet Union. And therefore you'd have World War III. And the Soviet Union knew that. And so they never did invade Belgium. Hell, they never even invaded Finland. So that's how that works and why it's so powerful. And a Pacific Indian Ocean-based NATO organization with a similar Article 5 would be extremely constraining to China, especially given its ambitions in its first island chain strategy and second island chain strategy. And now I'll finish it up, my friends, because that's what I'm talking about. That's why this is such a gigantic, huge deal. This is a tectonic shift in international groupings and international power, political and military and defensive, that is a true sea change. And you heard it here first. This is the beginning of it. This isn't even close to the middle. This is when it starts. You can look at the formation of AUKUS as the beginning chapter of what will evolve out into a full-blown Pacific policy of the future that has countries now picking sides of who they're going to partner with for the rest of this century. And what will that mean for the big powers of the United States and China? We'll find out next time here on Planet Avengers channel on Twitch. Okay, hopefully you all learned something. Was that good? Did you learn something new? Something exciting? Do you understand how the world works a little bit better? I sure hope so, because that's what I'm here for. But does anybody have any questions? That I'm sorry if I didn't get to your question, because when I start fielding questions, then all of a sudden it's like 5 hours later. Okay, let's see. Any questions? I'm trying to span through to see questions, but it's mostly looks like you guys are having conversations within the chat room, which of course I love. I love it. Let's see. Hit the quad, I see. Let's see. Stupid Fun Tim says, "Hi, Professor." Hi, what's going on, Stupid Fun Tim? Let's see. The only way I'll sign up for the military is if China invades Taiwan and the U.S. goes in to defend it. Yes, IDCI, that's another big thing. This, honestly, I'll give you a prediction right now you won't see anywhere else. I believe this AUKUS grouping will actually accelerate China invading Taiwan. I'm pretty confident. So now that countries are actually starting to form up policies of containment against China, I believe China will, they're already having discussions, and they're probably in closed-door conversations saying, we should probably go ahead and invade Taiwan now and officially take it back over before any of these international groupings get too much more structured, and before they form up Article 5 that might protect Taiwan. But they're not there yet, you know. China's looking at this saying, well, yeah, we get it. This is the beginning of something. But you're not at the point of defending Taiwan yet, so we should probably invade Taiwan now before they get to that point. That's my prediction. You heard it here first. Okay. Actually, IDCI, that's right. China's PR hasn't been very good in the West lately, but, you know, the West is not going to actively promote too much of its PR here either. Let's see. Injin says, but will they allow the French Canadians? The Quebecois may not join AUKUS. Oh, IDCI says, like, subscribe, donate. I'm sorry. Everybody always has to remind me about these things because I'm a terrible person about asking for doing the likes, the clicks, the loves, if you're a Prime member, you can subscribe for free or something like that. Anyway, hope you all enjoyed this. Hope you learned something. Let me know if you have something else you'd like to talk about Monday night. And I will try to do the same thing Same bat time, same bat plaid channel right here on Plaid Avenger, Twitch TV. Have a great night, everybody. End? End.